Was it a family curse that caused the unthinkable tragedy that happened to this beautiful family, or the unshakable desire to fulfill addiction which perpetuated crimes and led to neglect in a continuous downward spiral? Deadly Deep Dives. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. Nice to meet you if you've never been here before. There's a lot of details in this case. It's about a family that's plagued with addiction, abuse, child endangerment, neglect, and child welfare system failures, which led to multiple heartbreaking deaths, one of which may be suspicious or perhaps would set off all the other events that occurred thereafter. If you don't stay or you don't pause and come back, you won't get to the most horrific part of this story to formulate your own conclusions as to why all of this happened. Most of you will, I know that, but I encourage you to hear everything, including this part about today's sponsor, so please stay. This is one of the coolest brands that I've had sponsor me so far, and it's Aura Frames. My family lives over 3,000 miles away, and everything that happened in 2020 prevented me from seeing them. We had to cancel our trip. It's going on 3 years now, and all our families want, especially during the holidays, is to see us. I decided to gift one of these digital frames to my family, but listen, this isn't like those frames you're probably used to seeing. No, this is way cooler. First of all, look at the box. It's so nice looking. You don't even have to wrap it. You can slip it right in a package and send it. It's super easy to set up. I did it in about 2 minutes. You plug it in, download the app on your Android or your iPhone, connect to your Wi-Fi, add photos to the app, and they magically appear on the frame. But wait, that's actually not the coolest part. Gifting the frame is where the real magic happens because you can set the frame up before you send it. You can even add a welcome photo and a message that they'll see when they turn it on, which I think is really cool. What's even cooler is you can add new photos as you take them, because I always forget to send memories to my family. Right after I snap a picture, I can add it to the app, and then it does the rest. Another thing is you can even add the pictures via email if you prefer that way, because let's say you're on your computer and not your phone. But the app is the most secure way, and many other frames don't even have that option. Okay, but how cool is this? It has a touch bar on the top so you can manually scroll through the photos. Plus, you can like the photos. I think that's so cool. Just tap on it multiple times and you can just put little hearts there and everything. You can also see who added them because you can add users, and that way my sisters can add photos to my mom's frame right from their phones. There's unlimited storage and no subscription fee. You can upload 10,000 plus photos and video with no fees at all. Yes, you can even share videos and live photos. I love it. It's so cool. And this is why Oprah even added it to her favorite things for a 3rd year in a row in 2021. And the resolution on this frame blows me away. It looks like a real photo. I knew I was getting a quality product because it's recommended by 130 plus gift guides. Aura frames are seriously the perfect and most popular gift. They sold out last Christmas. And that's why I am showcasing and recommending them to you for the holidays. So I encourage you to get one at a discount. While they are still in stock, just look below. There's a link in my description box. And don't forget to use the code KIMBER for a generous, thank you Aura Frames, $30 off just for my viewers while supplies last. Thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring today's long video. I couldn't do it without brands like you or viewers like all of you. Okay, now let's get into the video. I am only going to be using authentic pictures throughout this entire video. I'm not doing the B-roll this time, so anything you see will be from news articles, videos I found online, or even the family's own Facebook pages. This video is intended for educational and documentary purposes. The content within this video contains themes that some individuals may consider triggering, offensive, or disturbing. The intent is not to disrespect viewers or any individual spoken about herein. Viewer discretion is advised. We have to start the story with Christine and Don Spirit. Christine married Don Spirit December 10th, 1988. They had 3 children together. Sarah Lorraine was born January 14th, 1986, and she was born with only 1 kidney. Josh, born in 1990, and Kyle Matthew, born on June 2nd, 1992. The spirits were told that Sarah would lead a normal life even though she only had one kidney and she shouldn't experience any issues. There was a chance of some slight loss in kidney function later in life, but this usually wasn't seen until about 25 years later. Dawn was a New Jersey native, and what is known is that the spirit family had been living in Florida since 1995. Don seemed to get himself in trouble with the law quite a bit. I don't have information on his childhood, but if I were to guess from what we know about similar cases, I'd say he probably didn't have the best upbringing. The past could be repeating itself in this case over and over again. Don was convicted twice in South Jersey in 1987, just a year after his daughter Sarah was born. He pled guilty to 2 separate charges. One was theft by unlawful taking, and the other was a weapons offense. There may have been more offenses before this date as well, but the convictions that are known after the ones I just mentioned happened between 1989 and the year 2000. Don was arrested at least 13 times and charged with various misdemeanors and felonies. The charges included battery, drug possession, allowing a child under 14 to operate a boat, drunk driving, depriving a child of food and shelter, even driving without a license in a hit and run, leaving the scene of the accident involving a death. It's safe to assume Sarah, Josh, and Kyle were not growing up in the safest household or with the best role models. Christine did not have it easy either. Domestic abuse was apparently a regular part of her relationship with Don, and her kids witnessed this, giving them a false reality of what a healthy relationship looked like. This wasn't the occasional pushing or shoving. Don seemed to have a bad anger problem and could become very violent. In 2002, he smashed Christine's car with a sledgehammer, and he broke all the windows in the vehicle after threatening to kill her. When questioned by the police, Christine told officers she was afraid of her husband. But when they asked her to make a formal statement about the violence that Don directed at her, the officers said she refused. In many similar cases, the abused are afraid to leave or press charges because the system doesn't always protect them. They fear it will make matters worse, so they stay quiet. Christine decided not to prosecute Don, and instead, he admitted himself for a mental health examination. Doctors diagnosed him with severe bipolar 1. It seemed like he could switch from normal to having extreme, uncontrollable outbursts, yet he would refuse to take or stay on medication. This incident with Christine's car was just a year after Don killed his son. Yes, Don killed his son, Kyle. Kyle was only 9, and it's a sad story. It may have been the beginning of a wave that sent ripples through the spirit family's future. The spirits were living in a small, single-family home in Tampa, Florida. This is what it looks like today. It had 3 small bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Kyle and Josh shared a room, and there was a big backyard for the children to play in. Like any mother, Christine loved her youngest son so much. She used to call Kyle Sweet Pumpkin Pie. When Kyle was just a toddler, he asked his mom to call him Applejacks, and that remained his nickname after that. It didn't matter what you called him, Kyle was a sweet, loving boy. He loved to go fishing, play soccer, basketball, and dreamed of playing in the NFL. Kyle wanted to do things with the boys. He didn't want to be left out. That was the first step in a series of events that would lead to his death. In 2001, Don planned a week-long hunting trip to 3 Lakes Wildlife Management Area, close to the rural town called Kenansville. It's located in Osceola County, which is 50 miles southeast of Orlando in South Florida. Don typically brought Josh along on his hunting trips. Josh was 11 at the time and Kyle was only 9. Don didn't think Kyle was old enough to accompany them, but Kyle begged Don to let him come. He said that Josh always got to do the fun stuff while he had to stay behind. Don told him he could come if he promised he would remain in the hunting stands watching. He could not handle a gun or hunt with them. Kyle would need to stay there for hours at a time, so Don didn't think this would be much fun, but he gave in and he let him go under those conditions. What do you think? Did you grow up around guns? Do you know how to shoot a gun? When was the first time you handled a gun, if you have? After the recent Oxford high school incident, some are questioning whether parents should allow children under the age of 18 to handle a firearm. After all, it is a deadly weapon. Is their frontal lobe developed enough to make adult decisions? That's the question. You tell me. Kyle didn't mind waiting around and watching because he loved animals and the forest. He could stare out into nature for hours and be entertained. Don was 38 at the time, and let's not forget, he was a convicted felon. Therefore, he was actually not legally allowed to own a firearm, but he did. Don purchased it from Christine's brother. What was interesting to me is that he was able to secure a hunting permit. You would think they would need to see something or check something to know that you're allowed to have a firearm. Don notified the school that both boys would be out for a few days. They piled into Don's red, white, and blue Nissan pickup truck with the window sticker that read, "I'd rather be hunting." They arrived at the area on Thursday, November 8th. They had a couple days to settle in and hang out before deer season opened on Saturday. They planned to stay until Wednesday, November 14th. They were waking up around 5:30 a.m. every morning to begin hunting. All three of them were wearing bright orange clothing that's used to prevent accidental shootings. Don had a .300 Browning Magnum rifle and Josh was carrying a .270. Kyle did as Don instructed and walked along with them, scoping out the area unarmed. He did not touch a firearm the entire trip. On Tuesday, their last night there, Don cooked a big meal. Pork chops, green beans, potatoes, and corn because he didn't plan on hunting the next day. He figured we'll have a big meal and we'll sleep in. As he had expected, Don was tired on Wednesday morning. He didn't plan on hunting and he didn't feel like hunting that day, but the boys wanted to go into the woods, so he drove them to a really good spot and they went on a 2-hour walk. Unfortunately, they had not had the opportunity to shoot even one deer the entire trip, and by the time Wednesday came around, it was gloomy and rainy and Don just wanted to get back home, so he began packing up as they planned. As Don packed the truck, he put Josh's rifle into its case and proceeded to clean his to do the same. Half talking to the boys and half talking to himself, he said something to the effect of, "Would you look at that? There's rust on the muzzle of the barrel." He began to take his thumb and polish that area. He was rubbing some oil into it, and this was to remove the rust, not realizing that Kyle would actually come face to face with the weapon to look at it. As Don tried to position it back in the case, he accidentally bumped the trigger trying to get it in. Kyle was shot in the head at point blank range. Don was obviously in absolute shock about what just happened. It happened so fast. There was nothing he could do. There was no way to know what would happen. Don is frantic. He grabs his phone. He tries to call 911. Meanwhile, Josh is right there. He's witnessing the entire thing, and there's no cell service. The area was way too remote, so Don throws Kyle in the back of his pickup truck, and he races back to the campsite as fast as he can. A man named Mike Evans, a 46-year-old from Fort Pierce, was driving out of the woods when he saw Don speeding up behind him. He didn't know what was going on, so he pulled over to let Don pass, and that's when he saw Kyle in the flatbed. He could tell that Kyle was most likely fatally injured. He later said it was the most horrifying thing he had ever seen. Evans decided to speed up and follow Don. Hunters were outside the campsite, and by this time, Don was able to get a hold of Christine. She went ahead and called Osceola County Sheriff's Office to meet him at the campsite. The hunters see Don screaming. They're running towards him to help him out, and many of them were also calling for help. Don drops to his knees and he screams. People said he was screaming, "Why me?" Evans was scared that Don may take his own life, so him and some other hunters decided to grab Don and take him away from Kyle's body. Others tried to make sure that Josh was okay. It must have been absolutely horrifying to see all of this play out in front of you with no way to help. Evans looked Josh in the eyes and he held him by his shoulders and he told him to be strong for his parents. He said, "Now you have to be a man sooner than most." The paramedics arrived, but it was clear there was nothing they could do for Kyle. Detective Kerwin King explained it was a high-powered rifle. You could only imagine what it had done. A family allowed Josh and Don to stay in their camper until authorities figured out what to do next. Everyone that was at the campsite was in shock. Don was a complete wreck. He said he knew the gun was loaded, he just thought he had the safety on. He was adamant his hands never got near the trigger. It's so sad, it's so horrible. There's so much that goes into being a gun owner, so many steps to make sure everything is safe. Some of the hunters that were there that night said they wished there were more signs around the woods reminding hunters about gun safety. Others said they don't think anything could have been done to prevent it. It was an accident. But was it? What do you think? Was this an unfortunate accident, or did something happen between Dawn and Kyle? Was there something that set Dawn off that day? Was Kyle begging Dawn to stay, to hunt, to hold a gun? A part of me truly believes this was never intended, but it would change the course of Dawn's life forever. And not just because Kyle wouldn't be there anymore, but because it changed something in Dawn that day.
Stewart accidentally shot and killed his 8-year-old son, Kyle, during what he called a hunting accident. That happened in November 14th during a hunting trip to Kenansville. That's about an hour southeast of Orlando. According to a 2003 article in the Orlando Sentinel, Stewart was walking through the woods with Kyle and his other son, Josh. He pointed out rust on the muzzle of his high-powered rifle, and that rifle fired, hitting Kyle in the head. Stewart says he drove for miles with Kyle in the back of his truck looking for help.
Just a day later, reporters were already over Christine and Dawn's home. Christine agreed to let a reporter in to speak with her. She was completely beside herself. She explained they were having a really difficult time coping. Christine told the reporter it was way too hard to talk about, and it's just been devastating, especially for Dawn. Christine said he was having a very hard time and that she was really worried about him. I can only imagine. It's too horrible to even think about. You have just taken the life of someone you gave life to. Christine went on to explain they didn't even have enough money to pay for Kyle's funeral expenses. She wanted to make sure that everyone knew who Kyle was. She told the reporter that he had saved his allowance to buy a bike. He'd been saving for months, and he finally found one on clearance that was only $32. He used the remaining money to buy a bike for his brother Josh. That's the type of kid Kyle was. He was a really good kid, and they missed him so much already. By November 17th, Dawn agreed to do an interview regarding Kyle's death. He told reporters that he wasn't going to bring Kyle on the trip, but he relented. He explained that Kyle loved animals and the forest. Dawn was sobbing through these words. He went on to say that made it even worse because Kyle was at a place he loved, and that would be the last time he would see any of that again. The reporter said that Dawn would switch between coherently explaining what happened to uncontrollably sobbing. All the while, Christine is right by his side. She's comforting him. She's rubbing his arm, just lovingly, and trying her hardest not to cry. Dawn kept repeating that it just happened so fast and he didn't have time to think. He kept quickly shaking his head from side to side as he kept repeating that over and over again. He kept saying, it's just unbelievable. He did this a number of times as though he was trying to shake the memories away. He's sobbing even more when he's explaining that Josh saw everything. He regrets that he couldn't think clearly enough in the moment to tell Josh to stand back or to look away. Can you imagine? That would haunt you for the rest of your life. Josh actually came out of his room and he sat down next to his dad and he hugged him. He told the reporter that they missed Kyle so much. One thing Dawn didn't forget to mention was that he knows he has been in trouble with the law, but he does not do drugs anymore, and he did bring a 12-pack of beer on the trip, but he only had 3 of them the entire trip. He didn't drink any on the day of the shooting. At the end of the interview, Dawn said this, "I may not have lived the best life, but I know that this was an accident. I know none of that matters when it comes to my son being dead. Dead because something went really wrong. What do you think?" At this point, investigators were looking into Dawn's past, especially this felony conviction he had in 1998 for the possession of marijuana over 20 grams. Convicted felons are not permitted to own guns, and he knew that, yet he went out of his way to buy one without leaving a paper trail. By the way, I don't know about you, but I was curious, so here's what 1 gram of marijuana looks like. And with only 8 more grams, he would have had 1 ounce. And this is what 1 ounce looks like. Therefore, it was actually presumed that Dawn was selling it and not just carrying it around for personal use. After this hunting tragedy, free gun safety classes began to fill up in Osceola County. These classes were for both adults and children. They were conducted by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. I was actually surprised to read that the director of hunter education said that kindergarten was when children should start to learn about gun safety. I guess it makes sense if you're thinking about toy guns and video games. Kids do need to know in advance that guns are dangerous and that the real ones are not to play with. I was initially thinking when I read it that he meant kindergartners should be learning how to shoot guns at 4 or 5 years old. Again, I am not well versed in hunting or guns in general, so this may be the norm. One of the National Rifle Association certified instructors, Bob Greer, said that many gun owners become complacent. They think they know how to handle a gun safely and properly, but at times when they take the classes, they find out they were mistaken. It takes hours for gun safety to become second nature. That way, in the spur-of-the-moment situations, your muscle memory kicks in. Dawn and Christine decided to move out of their home, which brought back way too many memories, and start fresh, leaving Tampa and moving to Bell, Florida. Bell is a small rural community in North Florida. It only has about 500 residents, I think less back when this happened, and it's located in Gilchrist County. The town was founded in the 1890s. It was named after a beauty pageant winner, Belle Fletcher. Maybe that was the most important thing that happened in this town because it's so small. And I can only imagine how much smaller it would have been back then. And I'm not trying to be facetious. You'll see what I mean. The per capita income in Belle is only about $12,000. Around 13% of the families and 17% of the population were below the poverty line. 19% of those were under the age of 18. This town is also 95% white, and it reminds me a lot of the town of Santa Claus, Georgia, that I talked about in the Daniels family slayings. I was curious about why they would pick Bell. This is a place that grows peanuts. There's cows roaming around in fields, and this is where more tragedy will occur. There's just so much land and not a whole lot to do except maybe fishing and hunting. All I see when I look at this map is springs and swamps and rivers, and I've been out to Ginny Springs. I used to live there, not far from there in Jacksonville, and it was fun, but it gets old. You can see it right here, and to the native Floridian like me, it screams Florida. Laying out on your rafts, drinking some White Claw all day, and when I look at this picture, I promise you, I can smell it. I can feel it, the humidity, I can smell the smoke coming from the campfire or people's cigarettes or a barbecue. Here's a video. Let's just do it that way. Here's a video I found, and this is in the middle of a pandemic. So you can just imagine how packed this place is on a normal holiday weekend.
Memorial Day weekend, we out here. Ginny Springs, social distancing at its best. Hey, don't talk us at home. Right? There you go.
Okay, so there you go. That gives you an idea of what it's like near Bell. The culture, the weather, the lifestyle, the type of people, that's it. But Bell is not this exciting at all. It's 20 minutes away and it's surrounded by mostly industrial companies, building suppliers, concrete businesses, a plantation, and just a bunch of churches. It's very hard to find work there. Residents that live there say that it's a nice, quiet, agricultural community. It's a close-knit community. If anything were to happen to any of your neighbors, someone would be so kind to set up a donation box and then everyone would pitch in. There are very few jobs. Most of the good ones involve things like hard labor, hauling rocks, sand, logs. And look at this. This is one of the major roads running through it. It's US 129. And these little turndowns, they're just dirt roads. Google Maps won't even let you go down these roads. But luckily, I did contact a YouTuber that drove down the road towards the spirit's home. So before I show you this footage of the road that Dawn's trailer's on, I wanted to thank another content creator who gave me permission to use his video. So his channel is called Stories from the Grave. I'm going to put it up on the screen and I will leave a link in my description box. If you want to see his whole video, I will also link it below so you can see the whole drive through because he drives all the way to where the area is. So this is the drive to the area where the trailer was. Now I just want to point out the location that he goes to show you is actually not Dawn's house. This is not the trailer that Dawn and his family lived in. Dawn's family lived in a trailer that's no longer on the property, has been torn down. And I will show you because he is standing in front of a mailbox here, which you can see, and that is to this residence that's shown in the video. However, you have to keep making your way down, and that is where the driveway would be right here on the map. I can show you that's where the driveway would be. And like I said, the trailer is no longer there. But this video still gives you a feel of what it's like driving down these roads. They are desolate. There is nothing there. Even your neighbors are not really that close. I want to thank him so much for letting me use this content. Let's jump back into Dawn and Christine. It's common for residents in Belle to live in mobile homes on several acres, and that is what Dawn and Christine did too. They moved to a mobile home on 2 acres of land in Belle, which they purchased, wait for it, for only $2,204.69 back in 1996, so maybe that's why they moved there. About a year later, in 2002, Dawn was arrested for driving his car on a suspended license. Since he had accumulated a number of convictions relating to traffic offenses, one, like I said, involving a hit and run with the death of another person, this time he was charged with what Florida refers to as a habitual felony. He was ordered to pay $43,500 in court costs, including fines. Remember, this is a family who couldn't even afford to bury their son. They did not have a lot of money. They had been struggling to make ends meet for quite some time, and they were just getting hit with blow after blow. They just couldn't get ahead. Now the authorities were really looking into Dawn's past, and a couple months later, he was charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon in connection to Kyle's death. It took about 2 years for the case to be resolved. As soon as the trial date was set, Dawn actually took a plea deal. It was on January 23, 2003, in exchange for a lighter sentence. Originally, he would have been facing up to 15 years in prison if a jury had convicted him. Dawn was already 40 at the time, and he said he just couldn't go through such an emotional trial. Outside the courtroom, Dawn and Christine were just sobbing. Christine was wearing a shirt, and it had Kyle's face on it in full color with the words, "My special angel," and his nickname, Applejacks, on it. Through tears, she said she was worried about how her family would hold up with all of this. First Kyle's death, and now Dawn going away for 3 years. She says she doesn't know how you would prepare for something like this. Then she explained how she thinks about Kyle all the time. She even kept a box full of trinkets and shoes and clothing and all sorts of items of Kyle's to remember him. Dawn told the media there's nothing he could do, probably referring to the fact that he cannot change what happened. Dawn was out on bond until his sentencing hearing on March 3rd. There was an interesting comment from Mike Saunders. He was the Deputy Felony Bureau Chief for the state attorney's office. He said, "It's a tragedy all the way around, but if Dawn had followed the law and not possessed a firearm, his child would not be dead." I had not really put that together for some reason, but he's got a point. No gun, no way for this to occur. Dawn's own public defender, Don Wagner, said the jury would have probably found him guilty because they couldn't offer them facts not to. Dawn could have chosen to take the necessary legal steps after his felony to undergo a process to restore his right to own a firearm, but he chose not to. And I think I know why. Because when I was looking into it, I realized when you have a criminal record, it's super expensive. You have to get a pardon, which includes filing an application with the state, and that requires a lawyer so you can fill it out properly. And then after that, with all the other fees, you're looking at a couple $1,000s. And then it still might not be approved, considering the likelihood is much smaller if you're like Dawn and have more than 10 convictions. Dawn was sent to serve his sentence at Hamilton Correctional Institution in North Florida. Christine was constantly worried because she thought that every time the phone rang, she was going to pick it up and the prison was going to be calling her to tell her that Dawn had taken his life. She was so sad because her children were missing out on their father being there for important milestones like Josh turning 13, becoming a teenager, and Sarah having their first grandchild. At this time, Dawn's daughter Sarah was only 17 and pregnant with her first child. Sarah had dropped out of high school in 11th grade, and she was working at a fast food restaurant and a local grocery store. She had started dating a man named Edward Neal Coleman. Their child was due in November. Now, I told you, there's a lot of people in this case, so I did make a graphic. You don't have to look at the screen. I will continue telling you who everyone is, but if you want to look, there is a mind map to be seen. Dawn would be in prison the next 3 years and miss out on meeting and spending time with his grandchild. I am sure that this was added pain for the Stewart family, not to mention Not having Dawn around made Christine a sudden single mother. She did find a job. She was selling life insurance to make ends meet. It was sad. Her surviving son Joshua was suffering with deep depression. You have to remember, he witnessed it all. He saw that. I have to look at those things in my classes for death investigation, but to see someone that I love in that state, in that condition, and watching it happen and play out, it would scar you for life. Sarah gave birth to her first son, Caleb, on November 22nd, 2003. She really wanted to name her son Kyle, but Christine was against it. She told Sarah it was way too much. It would bring back a lot of memories every time she would see him or hear the name, so that was a no. On June 20th, Christine, Joshua, only 13, his friend Liam, 12, and his cousin Louis, 8, took a 3-hour drive from Belle to where Kyle was killed. Then they had to go 7 miles deep into the woods at the wildlife management area. They were there to honor Kyle for what would have been his 11th birthday. Christine had visited 2 times before, and she left flowers and all kinds of little trinkets, but this time it was to place a brass plaque next to an oak tree that was planted in Kyle's memory. The family was still having a hard time coping. Christine said that being there helped to remember him, especially when she was walking through the woods, and she said it was hard for her to explain. Biologist H.W. Harder III was the one that was working there. He was installing the plaque, and he says he thinks he can explain it. It's a reminder, and accidents do happen. Okay, I think it's a little deeper than that, because people report being in nature makes them feel connected to the loved ones that passed away. Maybe it's the quiet calm or the noises that we can hear when everything's been blocked out. When all the sounds from everyday life aren't there anymore, there's just this still calm, and you can hear the sounds of nature. Have you experienced this? Because I know I have. And many times I hear people say that they can feel their loved ones when they see a butterfly or a rainbow, that there's just something about being in nature that gives them a feeling of peace and connection to the deceased. If you feel inclined, tell me in the comments if you've ever experienced that. It would have been hard for Don. He couldn't be there, but Christine said at this point she felt like she had lost him as well. He was probably just a shell of who he was before. Sarah really wanted to go too, but she had just had the baby and she couldn't make a 3-hour trip. As Harder put the plaque into place, the only sound they could hear was the rhythmic beating of the rain. When Josh saw the plaque, he fell to his knees and he pulled his legs up to his chest, and he was sitting in that fetal position, continuing to cry. The group of them just held on to one another for support, and Christine said she felt completely empty, but she had to keep it together because if she broke down, she would not be able to help the boys and her family because they couldn't help themselves, and she had to be that pillar and stay strong. Speaking of which, it took a lot to make this decision, but Christine filed for divorce from Don in 2005. After over 20 years being together and just 1 year before he was expected to be released. Being the victim of Don's violence, Christine probably felt like it was now or never. He was locked up. She could get away and start over and be safe, and that's what she did. The same year, on April 16th, Sarah had her second child with Edward. They named her Kylie Marie. Kylie, after Kyle. So this time she got her wish. Don was released from prison the next year in 2006, and he moved back to the mobile home. He had gained sole possession of the property during the divorce. Life was a lot different when Don came back. He had 2 new grandchildren. His daughter was only 19. She had a 3rd baby on the way. Yes, a 3rd baby, another baby with Edward. All that responsibility. His wife gone, having to fend for himself without his family, plus having to figure out how to reconnect and fit himself in to his children's worlds. Sarah was not doing well. Edward was always in trouble with the law, and she had been experimenting with drugs, plus hanging out with a bad crowd. She was also responsible for looking after her younger brother Josh at this time. Do you think that having a father like Don made Sarah attracted to men that were similar to him? Because I see that happening sometimes. It doesn't make sense because you'd be like, you can do better, but it happens. What do you think about Sarah having a 3rd child? People can choose to do whatever they want, but it's hard. It's very hard. Children are a huge responsibility, not to mention the extra expenses and she was practically a child herself. She's only 19. Her boyfriend's not doing much. He's proving to be very unreliable. She couldn't work since she couldn't afford daycare and she had those kids. This left her parents or anyone around her to help pick up the slack. I remember in the comments of my video about the Daniels family, someone said that one of the women should not have had children because she was a drug addict. I try to explain that many times individuals on welfare or struggling with finances, they don't have equal access to birth control. They may have never even learned about the various methods. Other people actually choose to have many children so that they can take advantage of money benefits from the state. I'm from Florida. I can attest to the state giving a decent amount of money, food stamps, all kinds of services to moms, especially single moms. And even more so if you have more than one child. The more children you have, the more benefits you receive. But we'll never know why Sarah wanted to have more children. She gave birth to her third child, Jonathan Neal Coleman, March 19th, 2006. But at this point, even as happy as they were facing eviction and they had no food in their house. The same year, Department of Children and Families, the DCF, was called. A neighbor had found Sarah's oldest child, Caleb, with bite marks and bruises, and he was wandering the streets with a steak knife. The neighbor told the DCF that Sarah used drugs like crazy, and she was constantly leaving her children in crack dens. A DCF report that I read from August 21st, 2006, indicates that both Sarah and Edward were allegedly perpetrators against their children regarding endangerment, which could have included injuries. When the caseworkers arrived, they noticed that 2-year-old Jonathan was in a cast. He had a cast on his leg. Sarah was trying to explain that he fell off a trampoline. As the investigators were questioning her, they asked her why a baby his age would be allowed on a trampoline. And then they asked where it was, and there was no trampoline. Evidence showed they didn't believe Sarah, yet they did nothing to make sure that these children were safe from harm. There was another report a few months earlier that Edward had beaten Sarah in front of the children. No ongoing services were provided to the family. Their caseworker concluded the children were not in danger, and therefore they were not removed. They didn't think that Edward and Sarah were causing the injuries to the children, so the case was closed. By 2007, the DCF had referred Sarah to get help, to voluntarily get the services she might need. They could teach her how to be a better mom. They could give her different resources so she could learn what to do differently, but she refused. Edward was in and out of jail, and she was bouncing around between Christine's house and Dawn's house anytime Edward was not around. As Sarah usually ends up at Dawn's. The DCF was continuing to receive reports that these children were at risk for abuse and neglect. The calls to the DCF hotline included allegations of substance abuse, domestic violence, medical neglect, inadequate supervision of these children. Sarah would leave the children with relatives and wouldn't return. She wouldn't contact them for days or even weeks at a time, and it reminded me of Casey Anthony. If you don't know the cases I talk about sometimes when I reference them, I apologize so much. You could always look them up, but considering you're watching this video, you probably already know. In February 2007, reports showed that Sarah was ordered to relinquish custody of her children, and I was like, finally, these children are going to be removed, but not for long. She signed a power of attorney relegating the children's care to other family members. The children were given to different caretakers, which I thought was a little bit odd, but I don't have all of the details. I know Christine, that's Sarah's mom, she took Caleb. A woman named Linda Dickinson, I don't know the relation, took Kylie. And Jonathan went to a woman named Tammy Sassani, who's related to the Spirit family. These children did not have it easy. That's an understatement. They had been tossed around and cared for by many different people. That's a lot of instability for such young children who need a lot of structure and attention. It seems like 2007 was the start of a complete downward spiral, not only for Sarah, but it was where her brother Josh Spirit's criminal record begins as well. There's burglary, larceny, and it does not end there. Josh seems to continue to get in trouble with the law, just like his dad and his sister. I found the Facebook pages for almost everyone in this case, and here's a picture of Josh. This is from his Facebook. Notice he has a tattoo commemorating his brother Kyle. He has another tattoo that reads, "There is no safer place to be than in God's loving hands. Safer in death than in life, I guess." Sadly, that seems to ring true in this case. Just a month after handing the kids over, DCF allows them to be returned to Sarah, and now she's being investigated again. This time, it's inadequate supervision relating to Caleb and threatening to harm Jonathan. DCF finally says, okay, we need to provide some services. So they provide what's called in-home services with a community-based agency called Partnership for Strong Families. So we have the DCF and we have the PSF. The PSF is contracted by the DCF to deliver comprehensive child welfare services to children who are victims of abuse and neglect. I'm going to be going into this a little bit. You may or may not care, but there's definitely obvious systematical issues with the way DCF handled this case. I've always wondered this, and I finally found out that the process in Florida is that they have an abuse hotline. It's open 24/7, so someone has to call it to make a report. The DCF investigates. They screen out situations that don't meet the state's definition of maltreatment because they want to know, are we wasting our time or is this for real? So they kind of do a welfare check. If the issues are verified, then the PSF will come in to do these in-home services, which include interviewing the children, the parents, counseling sessions, a care plan, etc. But there's really not somebody there watching. Instead, parents can even refuse the services. They're either voluntary or involuntary, and these are voluntary services. You can take them or you can leave them. However, if they do refuse, they at the very least have to provide the contact information of a family member, and then that person kind of becomes the third party, the extra person to be responsible, and they have to agree that they're going to make sure everything's going to be okay. Not that reliable, especially when you have family members who are doing just as poorly as you are. Otherwise, the PSF will be there working on the case, but it doesn't say how often. Are they there once a day? I don't think so. Are they there once a month? I don't know. It says that they provide assistance with food, housing, rent, utilities, clothing, medical care, transportation, employment, legal services, substance abuse and mental health care, crisis intervention. You get the idea. They even help with family planning. So if she didn't want to have any more children, this would be the time she would become educated and get on birth control. I wanted to showcase this process, so I found a video following a caseworker around, and she is here explaining her job and what it's like to have the responsibility that is put on these caseworkers.
Last year, the statewide child abuse hotline received over 310,000 calls. Child protective investigators are then tasked with what can become life and death decisions. Such cases can range from parenting advice to the more serious allegations of abuse and neglect.
Their child is almost like their property, you know. They don't want anyone to tell them anything.
The job demands long hours and difficult decisions.
I think about that all the time. I wonder if did we make the right decision? Is there anything else we can do, you know? That's what I tell the new people. You can't get it out of your head because you're always thinking about that child and did you make the right decision for that child?
You heard her say that she thinks about whether she made the right decision. That's a lot of weight on a person's shoulders, and it proves to be too much for the workers in this case. Edward's mother tried to alert the DCF to the fact that children were being neglected once again. She notified them her grandson Caleb was so hungry, he was hoarding food. He didn't know when he was going to get fed next. She said no child should go through that. This time she threatened to call the media if the DCF refused to step in. It's weird because reports show that when the caseworkers came to check on Sarah and the kids would be dressed well, they looked happy, they were clean. But I keep thinking looks can be deceiving. There's so many pictures of these beautiful children, and Sarah's beautiful. She's a beautiful woman. She's got these big blue eyes, this really pretty smile, and her kids are absolutely adorable. I'm guessing that she knew how to charm the caseworkers and make believe everything was fine. Just a year later in 2008, Sarah was pregnant once again. This is her fourth child, and this time it's with another man. His name is James Stewart. Most people refer to him as Jamie, so that's what I'm going to do too. He was also in and out of jail, not a steady fixture in their lives. There was a report in February that Jamie had been abusing substances in the home with the children there. The DCF concluded that he had to enter a treatment facility and provide power of attorney to Christine. Sarah, Jamie, and the kids were living in a shack. It was a very small structure in the back of Jamie's family's property. One of the neighbors said that Sarah would come over all the time, knocking on their door, asking for food, for diapers. She didn't have anything. I thought the DCF was supposed to be giving her things. I don't understand, but we'll find out. At this point, from what I could gather on police reports, her 3 other children's father, Edward, was facing a number of years in prison. So it's safe to assume he wouldn't be part of Sarah's or the kids' lives for long, if ever. Sarah moved to Christine's house in Fort Pierce, Florida, and while she was there, she was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor in March. She was 22 at the time, and there was an 18-year-old living there as well. She might have gotten caught buying him alcohol. That's the only thing I can think of. I can't find any information on it, just the charge. And the 18-year-old was named Christopher Jeffers. I know that Christine has the last name Jeffers as well, so they had to be related, but I don't know how. Just 3 months later in June, Sarah was once again charged in connection to stealing when she was caught shoplifting at a retail store. This was a subsequent offense, which carried additional fines and consequences. By August 27th, 2008, Sarah was living with Don again. She was 8 months pregnant when she calls the police to let them know Don is beating her up in front of her 3-year-old daughter, Kylie. He's also threatening to beat up Kylie and Jonathan. She told police that she was very scared of him. He was 6'2" and weighed over 280 pounds. She told them, "I know what he's capable of." When an officer arrived on the scene, he found Sarah. She was visibly shaken with red marks on both sides of her face. She said that Don became enraged. She was telling him she couldn't afford to pay his taxes for his property where they both lived. Sarah could hardly take care of herself. She was unemployed and she had nowhere to go. She was sitting there trying to reason with her dad, telling him, "I'm going to get the money, my friends are going to help me," but apparently Don either didn't believe her or he could have just been fed up. All of a sudden, she said, he grabbed her by the arms, he shoved her up against the refrigerator, then he took both of his hands and he placed them on the sides of her face and he squeezed her cheeks together really hard. And you could see there were red marks just below her eyes on her face like fingerprints.
In 2008, Stewart was arrested for aggravated assault on his then pregnant daughter, Sarah.
A police report the I-team obtained from Gilchrist County Circuit Court says Sarah was 38 weeks pregnant with her daughter Destiny when Don Stewart shoved her against a refrigerator and boxed her cheeks.
Do you recall, if you were following the Gabby Petito case, when she explained to the officers what Brian Laundrie had done to her? He had grabbed her face. He had pushed her and grabbed her face. It's so similar, and it's so sad. Sarah told police that Don threatened to make her life a living hell if she ever reported him, but this time she did. She said she needed a restraining order against him because he was starting to become physical with her children. He was hitting them with belts until they were black and blue. When Gilchrist County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the mobile home the next day to arrest Don, of course he refuses to come out. And he told them, quote, "The only way you're gonna get in here is to break down the door and throw in tear gas." But eventually he gave up and he was taken into custody. He was later sentenced to 6 months in jail. Sarah's 4th child, Destiny Nicole Stewart, was born just 1 month after this incident on September 27th, 2008. Completely healthy, beautiful little girl. Just weeks later, Sarah is writing a letter to the court. I have some of it right here that I saw on the news. And she's sitting there asking for leniency in her dad's case, and she's taking the blame for what happened. Part of the letter says, quote, "I forgive him for what he did, and I'm willing to stand by his side and help him through his problems."
While Don was awaiting trial, Sarah wrote a letter to the judge asking that he not be sent back to prison. She said, "I love my father. He's the only family I have, and he's a big part of mine and my children's life." The letter said that since Stewart accidentally killed her brother Kyle, he hadn't been emotionally or mentally stable. She also said he will die if he goes to prison, and it would kill me to know I put him there.
I personally think This was a result of her being alone with all of her children. She's in desperate need of support. So at this point, she doesn't even care if it's her abusive father. She just needs somebody. That wasn't the first time that this happened. There were a number of violent incidents between Sarah and Don from the moment that he got out of prison, probably even before he went to prison, considering the way he treated Christine. Many of the reports included details about how Don would constantly terrorize his family. Don had issues with his anger in the past. He would blow up and act with violence out of nowhere. Sarah said he had a violent temper. She was scared of him. She must not have been that scared, or her desperation outweighed her fear, because she never showed up for the hearing. The petition was dismissed. By refusing to testify against him, a court domestic violence protection order was dropped, and that opened her up to the possibility of suffering more abuse. By this time, Sarah had also been in trouble with the law a number of times herself. Her first offense dates all the way back to 2000, when the Spirits lived back in Tampa and she was about 13. She was charged with operating a boat without a boater's license, and Don was also charged in this case because he was the one that allowed her to operate the vessel illegally. Sarah seemed to stay out of trouble, or at least she wasn't caught, until about 1 year after her and Don were reunited. She was charged with larceny just a couple days after Independence Day in 2004 while she was living at Don's. It was considered a first-time offense, plus it was for items totaling less than $100, so she didn't have much in the way of consequences, if any. Just a little slap on the wrist. Later that same year in December, she was charged with burglary and trespassing, so we can assume the punishment for the first offense wasn't enough to deter her. Maybe Don contributed to Sarah's downfall. Their relationship was described by family and close friends as a tumultuous, violent father-daughter relationship. Fighting one day, caring for each other the next. It was a cycle of love and hate. Jamie Stewart's aunt, Colleen, to keep track of things, Jamie is the father of Sarah's third and fourth child, Destiny and Jonathan. Colleen becomes close to Sarah. When she was asked about Sarah and Don's relationship, she would say that one day Don wouldn't want anything to do with her and the kids, and then out of nowhere, he would just bring them food and groceries and be all kind and loving. Both Colleen and her daughter, Katie, who was only a teenager at the time, helped out with the kids. I pulled up Don's criminal record, and I found out in 2009, Don was once again picked up for another traffic violation, this time DUI. It was reduced to reckless driving, which sounds worse, but to me, after everything else we know about his convictions in the past, it seems like nothing. Meanwhile, the man that Sarah had her first 3 children with, Edward Coleman, he was now in a new relationship with another woman named Tiffany Hunt. Tiffany gave birth to their son, Edward Neal Coleman, on November 22nd, 2009, the same birth date as his first son, Caleb, born 6 years earlier. And sadly, just like the fate of the boy that Caleb was supposed to be named after, little Kyle, Edward's baby died just 4 months after he was born on April 1st, 2010. It's just so sad. Baby was so little, and I searched and I couldn't find any information regarding how he died. I do know that they had a funeral service and they had a burial at Trinity Memorial Gardens in Pasco County, Florida. Tiffany had another child before Edward Jr., and her name was Mariah Grace Coleman. I'm not sure if she was Edwards or not, but she did have the same last name. I was able to locate who I think is Tiffany Hunt, and I got to see pictures of her and her family, and she has since married. She has a bunch of beautiful children. She's not married to Edward, and sadly, he couldn't be at his baby son's funeral because he was locked up. I'm just trying to give you a feel of the individuals that were surrounding these children and where they came from. That's why I'm telling you all these details. Just 2 months before this, on September 2nd, Edward was evading authorities. There was a warrant that was out for his arrest for a violation of probation. Fabulous. The U.S. Marshals and the Tampa Police Department created a task force to apprehend Edward. He was considered armed and dangerous. He had a known history of violence. U.S. Marshal Scott Lee heard over the radio that Edward was coming out of his car and then he was fleeing on foot. And he was running towards a drive-thru of a Checkers fast food restaurant. Lee was driving his car toward Coleman. He was flashing his lights, his siren was blaring. He drove across Hillsborough Avenue. He went over the center median and he drove toward Checkers parking lot. He sees that there are no vehicles that are exiting the drive-thru, thank goodness. And he also sees that Coleman is in the drive-thru area. Edward Coleman, I keep going back and forth. I think you know. So Lee enters the drive-thru going 15 miles per hour. That's fast. But authorities were worried because they wanted to catch him as soon as possible. There was a middle school right behind Checkers and it was just letting out. And this was a potentially armed and dangerous criminal. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's going 15 miles an hour. He sees him jump in front of the patrol car. He didn't have a second to stop. And Lee struck him with the vehicle and the car jumps over the curb and it lands right against a retaining wall, pinning Coleman up against the wall and injuring him as a result. Just like in the movies or a TV show, right after he heals, he's locked up and taken to prison. This time he's sentenced to 25 years in prison. And you probably could have guessed, but needless to say, he was never going to be involved in his children's life again. Let's turn to Sarah's new boyfriend, James Stewart. They had their first child in 2008, which was Sarah's fourth child, Destiny Stewart. 2 years had gone by between the time that she had her third child with her previous boyfriend, Edward, who we just got done talking about. As I pointed out, Jamie wasn't on his best behavior. He was also in trouble with the law. And because they live in such a small town, it made me think of this proverb. I'm sure you've heard it before. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. And breaking it down to its meaning, someone who's unoccupied and bored will find mischief. Someone who has nothing better to do will partake in something that will get them into trouble. James Lawson Stewart was born in December of 1990. He was only 18 when he and Sarah had their daughter, Destiny. Sarah was 22. They were so young, and I'm sure that Sarah expected Jamie to take some responsibility for her other kids as well. Not just Destiny, but I'm not sure Jamie was willing, ready, or able to do so at all. He was around more before 2012 because that is when most of his criminal cases seemed to have been going to court. And he was just in and out of jail. His sister Colleen was definitely around more than him when it came to Sarah and the kids, especially because she had her new niece, Destiny. Colleen Stewart was born in February of 1979. She was 11 years older than Jamie. Since she was closer to 30, I'm sure that Jamie and Sarah saw her as more of an adult than they were and possibly counted on her for advice and assistance. However, Colleen had been getting in trouble with the law since at least 1998, back when she was around the same age that they were, about 19. Colleen's daughter was 11 at the time. Her name was Katie. I'm sure it was nice for Katie to play with Sarah's kids too, even though Sarah's oldest, Caleb, was only 5. Kids like to play together. Colleen and Katie spent a good deal of time either at Dawn's or at Jamie and Sarah's place. They became very close friends, if not best friends, and they probably considered each other family. Their closeness and their relationship comes into play a bit later and definitely had some part in the horrific events that end up occurring just 6 years later. Colleen's criminal record includes offenses for resisting arrest, larceny, theft, violence towards a police officer, and driving with a suspended license. On July 3rd, 2010, Sarah's 5th child, Brandon James Stewart, was born. Sarah needed help more than ever. She had 5 children under the age of 8, with Brandon being just a newborn that needed a lot of attention. There's no surprise. DCF was once again at Sarah and Jamie's house. They just couldn't do it. They were not able to fend for themselves. It was in November, and there was a report called in that Caleb had sustained burns to his body. In-home services were started once again with the PSF. Did they remove the children? No. Burns on the body. I'm not sure if it was the increasing number of children or if the children were getting older and they were needing more supervision. I don't know if that resulted in the continued and more intense issues that were surrounding this family. And maybe it was the compounding circumstances. It was a sick cycle. No one could escape it. It was one thing after another, more children, more problems. They were unstable parents in poverty, unable to appropriately care for their kids. They know that they're seen as failures by the state, by their community. Since the town was so small, neighbors from everywhere they lived had called DCF on them. Was this leading Sarah to seek comfort in drugs, which was resulting in more issues and eventually addiction? Addiction leading to needing more money to get her fix, and then using the state funds to do that over feeding her own children. That's what I assumed. It's one theory. Those are assumptions we can make. But whatever it was, things got worse. They got so desperate for drugs that Don decided to begin growing marijuana on his property, either for self-use or to sell. In Florida, cultivating marijuana is a felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison as well as a $5,000 fine. Don could not afford to be doing this, but he did it. And what's worse is it becomes a first-degree felony if there are any minors living at the residence where the plants are being grown. He gets caught, but this wasn't a professional operation. There were way less than 25 plants, which is like the threshold on what kind of felony you're going to get. Therefore, Don did not get sent to prison, but he did have his driver's license suspended for another 6 months. Don even tried to sue both Sarah and her ex Edward for child support. Kylie had just started kindergarten at Bell Elementary School. Caleb was already attending school, and the teachers were very familiar with the Spirit family, as they had been dealing with previous issues in regard to Caleb's well-being. There was a time when he reported they had no electricity in the trailer. This poor little boy told teachers that the adults got to eat good dinners. They got to have steak and chicken, but the kids were only allowed to eat ramen noodles or cereal. School was also notified that both children had been caught stealing food from the other kids at school because they were so hungry. That year, the PSF was working with Jamie and Sarah again after a report that the children had severe and chronic cases of head lice. Kylie was not allowed to return to school until the issue was resolved. Instead of Sarah caring about her daughter's education, she ignores the bugs and she just doesn't send Kylie back. Therefore, poor Kylie needs to repeat kindergarten the following year. On November 2nd, 2010, Jamie and Sarah were once again being investigated by the DCF, this time for a cigarette burn or a cigarette lighter burn that his teacher noticed on the side of his neck. Good old PSF stepping in again to attempt to get this family back on track. This is where I would have to truly stop and consider the danger that these children were in. Burning a child? Or a child just becoming burned by themselves on account of neglect and the lack of supervision? That is a huge issue. I've seen kids get removed from homes for way less, yet the children are still there. One issue was that different caseworkers would be responding to these incidents over the years. So the DCF would explain that the agency would view things as a snapshot, like this is a snapshot of what this family's like, rather than a movie. So if you're looking at all the ins and outs and all the characters that are at play, you can see the big picture, but if you're just looking at a snapshot, you really don't know what's going on. So essentially, they were not putting two and two together, even though children's lives were at stake here. The times that Sarah and Jamie were the caregivers and the caseworkers were investigating them, they wouldn't do enough research into Don's past, let's say. He's a convicted felon. He has a checkered past. So when they wouldn't volunteer to get help, Sarah and Jamie, they would turn to Don as a support system. He was the one that, remember I said, signs off as a third party? The police, EMTs, the school resource officers in Bell were familiar with the Spirit family, yet none of these reports seemed to come together and paint the horrific picture of this family's grim reality. Without enough money to afford the drugs they were used to acquiring, Jamie started to buy synthetic marijuana for him and Sarah. I had heard about synthetic marijuana back in the day, probably around the same time. It was a popular alternative, plus it was legal then, but it's not legal now, at least not in Florida. I never knew what it was or why anyone would want to use a synthetic drug like that when they could just get the real thing. But it turns out it's cheaper, easier to get, and it gets you just as high, if not higher. It's shredded plant materials that are sprayed with a chemical similar to chemicals found in marijuana, but it's not the same. In fact, it's not safe, and it may affect the brain much more powerfully than marijuana. The effects can be unpredictable and in some cases more dangerous or even life-threatening. These synthetic drugs are psychoactive and they affect how the brain works. They can change your mood. They can change your awareness, thoughts, feelings, and your behavior. I also read somewhere that they can be up to 100 times more potent than THC.
It's a drug that you may have never heard of, but it is raising serious safety concerns in communities across the nation. Take a look at this video just in, showing a man high on synthetic marijuana, according to law enforcement. Now, police say that this drug is partly responsible for a spike in violent crime.
What made them popular to Sarah was that you could get them in smoke shops, novelty stores, even gas stations. You could buy them over the internet as well. They also come in this flashy packaging that can look cool to kids, so it makes it more enticing or seem fun. Its street name is Spice. The specific brand of spice that Sarah and Jamie like to buy was called K2. Users have reported symptoms of psychosis, delusional or disordered thinking, detached from reality. They have psychotic effects as well, which could include extreme anxiety, confusion, paranoia, extreme and unreasonable distrust of others, hallucinations, sensations and images that seem real but are not really there. I bet you know where I'm going with this. It's important to keep all of these things in mind as you hear about what happens just a few years after the Stewart family begins their journey into making spice a normal part of their lives. This spice is not the spice of life. It's actually one of the catalysts of death here. Wait, don't go anywhere. I know many of you are not fans of two-part videos, but wait, I am not either. I wasn't done with some of my research. I was waiting on a couple police reports, but I finally got everything and I will be done very soon. However, I wanted to put this part out. I am going to put the second part out in just a couple days, not next week, so you don't have to wait long. Please, please, please do your best not to look this case up if you don't know what happens. If you already know, I encourage you to watch part 2. I go deep into the crime scene, the autopsy report, and I provide news clips I had not seen anywhere before. I'll link part 2 below when it's ready, or up in the cards, and at the end of this video on the screen. That way it's easy for you to find. And I will make sure to put part 2 in the title this time. I will see you soon. That's it. That's all I have for you today. I will see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already and you enjoy videos like this. Bye.